Act, and I thank you.
Look, whether you are a consumer, a worker, or a small business owner, our regulatory system should work for you and even with you, but never against you. Unfortunately, that is just what's going on today. Tom Marino just gave you a perfect story of how the regulatory state is working against the American business, consumer, and family. Take the president's so-called Clean Power Plan rule, another one of these multi-billion-dollar regulations. In February, the Supreme Court issued a stay on this rule. Today, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals is hearing arguments in a challenge against it. This is a rule that is especially egregious. It's an egregious example of this president's unlawful overreach. It essentially forces states to upend their energy economies without an act of Congress. It is designed to cripple fossil fuels, moving us away from energy that is reliable and affordable, and doing it without a vote of Congress. It is another frontward attack on coal country, which has already been decimated by this administration's policies. All told, it is estimated that this one rule will raise electricity prices in all 47 states that it affects. Again, this comes down without an act of Congress. There's got to be a better way to deal with these things. And there is. There is a better way. Our plan says that no major regulation should become law unless Congress makes a vote. Look, what we're trying to achieve here is reasserting self-government, government by consent. In America, we as citizens write laws that govern ourselves through our elected representatives. That's not happening today. You got an administration that is passing these rules that are the full force of law on our consumers, on our businesses, on American people that they have no voice for. That is costing them their jobs, their livelihoods, giving them skyrocketing electricity bills. We should encourage energy development so we can actually lower costs and create jobs. All of these ideas are part of our Better Way agenda, which you can learn more by going to better.gop. In the meantime, our hope is that today this rule is struck down permanently before coal country is destroyed and before Americans are consigned to these higher energy costs imposed by these unlawful regulations.
Well, good morning. Some of you seem a little tired, up late last night, watching a debate maybe. As Tom Marino and the Speaker talked about in a better way, there are different elements. We created this country with three co-equal branches, and they're not equal today. The people's voice is not being heard from the standpoint of how can we change that. There's another element in a better way, and that's when it comes to health care. On the floor this week, we'll have Adrian Smith's bill dealing with co-ops. Co-ops were given $2 billion to 23 co-ops inside Obamacare. 16 of those 23 have already failed or are about to. So what is the answer from the president to that family that purchased their insurance? A young family, maybe somebody is sick, or that small business that purchased through a co-op, is to punish them more with an individual mandate with a tax. Adrian Smith removes the individual mandate. Obamacare has been failing upon itself. It's time that the rest of America understands that. But in a better way, we have a better plan for health care. Today, we're protecting those that have been failed with purchasing through a co-op, for the billions of dollars that were wasted, to those that have gone under, to protect those and not have government punish them when they did nothing but being right. So also legislation that we have moving this week is WRDA. So we will deal with the infrastructure. This is a bill that's been coming through for quite some time. We want to get it finished, get it moved out of the House. The Senate has already moved theirs, and that we can go to conference. And I yield back.
I want to thank Tom Marino for bringing his bill forward. This barrage of radical regulations that are coming out from all of these federal agencies, the whole alphabet soup of agencies, from the EPA to the IRS to the NLRB to this latest overtime rule by the Department of Labor. These regulations are crushing the middle class, and they're forcing thousands of jobs overseas. It's got to stop. And part of our Better Way agenda starts addressing this, to bring common sense into the regulatory process and say, if there's a regulation that's brought forward by an unelected bureaucrat in Washington, it should first come to the elected representatives of the people. And if there's a regulation that comes forward that's being challenged because it's going to crush middle-class jobs, shouldn't that be on pause until it plays itself out in the courts? There's another bill we're going to be taking up this week by Tim Walberg that pushes back on this overtime rule. And the overtime rule, you could talk to any small business, but I use the example of the great restaurants we have in New Orleans. Some of the best restaurants in the world are in New Orleans, and they're all small businesses. And there's so many stories of people that started off as a dishwasher or a busboy and worked their way up, and now they're finally part of the middle class. They're finally buying their first home. And this overtime rule comes along and takes away their opportunity to achieve. And it's forcing them to go back to being hourly employees again. This is crushing the middle class. And these aren't even policies that have come before Congress to be held accountable. So we're going to finally push back on these regulations to rebuild the middle class. And you saw this play out last night. Donald Trump talked about rolling back these regulations that are killing middle class jobs, and Hillary Clinton wants to continue expanding the radical regulations that Barack Obama's imposed that are forcing thousands of jobs overseas. It's time to reverse that trend, to bring those jobs back home and rebuild our middle class.
A few weeks ago, I met with a young farmer and his wife. They're probably in their early 30s. They grow produce and they sell it direct in Eastern Washington. And because of new regulations coming out of the FDA, he's not sure that they'll be able to continue farming. And I asked him, so what are you going to do? And he says, I don't know. When the law was passed, he thought that they would be fine. When the regulations came out, he said it's not going to work. And he had no say in these regulations that are affecting his livelihood and ultimately have crushed his desire to maintain a family business. And he and millions of other Americans find themselves in similar situations. Representative government is to reflect the people's priorities. It's to be bottom up, not top down. And that's why our plan to restore constitutional authority, a better way to do the people's business, is so fundamental. It's fundamental to representative government. It's fundamental to hearing the people's voice and having their voice reflected in the priorities within the government. So whether you're a farmer in Eastern Washington, or a teacher in the Midwest, or a small businesswoman in Alabama, we must restore your power, your priorities, your voice in our government. So I'm grateful, too, to have Tom Marino with us today, his leadership on the REVIEW Act that we passed last week, whether it's the REVIEW Act, the Stop Settlement Slush Funds Act, the Regulatory Integrity Act. We are taking steps to restore a vision for a more confident America. And we're going to continue to take this message all across the country in the upcoming weeks, continue to share our ideas, and make Americans aware that there is a better way.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Before I was elected to Congress, I spent a couple decades practicing as a CPA in the tax area. Since the Reagan reforms of the 1980s, our tax code has grown exponentially, becoming more complex, unreasonably obscure, and far too difficult to understand. It appears even the IRS can't figure it out, as they've paid out over $150 billion in fraudulent tax credits. That's your hard-earned tax dollars being sent to someone else who is committing tax fraud. Our Better Way proposals seek to solve many of the problems within the current tax code. It simplifies the tax laws, taking numerous tax brackets down to 3. It's fair by eliminating things like the marriage penalty. It will make America more competitive in the world by incentivizing U.S. companies to expand here and abroad. And it will rein in an out-of-control IRS and significantly reduce the stress and dread the Americans face during tax season. Taxes may be a necessary burden, but that doesn't mean the federal government should make it worse. Our Better Way agenda will build an opportunity economy in America based on these common sense solutions.
Somebody have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some of your members this morning are sounding open to having money for Flint, Michigan in a short-term CR. You've been clear that should be addressed in Florida, but is it a deal killer in your review in a short time?
I'm not going to negotiate in the media. We think that the proper place for that is in the WRDA bill. It's a water resources bill. Our WRDA bill is coming to the floor. The Senate had a more open WRDA process, so it made it in their bill. We're following regular order. It's not germane in WRDA itself. We're bringing our bill to the floor. That means we're going to conference. We're going to follow regular order, and that, I think, is the better place to address this. I'm not going to get into the particulars about negotiations.
Mr. Speaker, at last night's debate, Hillary Clinton brought up an episode from Donald Trump talking about a Miss Universe contestant's weight. This morning on Fox, Donald Trump doubled down on it. He said that this Miss Universe contestant, she gained a massive amount of weight, and it was a real problem. I'm wondering if you have concerns with those kind of.
I was working out and working this morning. I wasn't watching Fox News this morning, so I'm not going to comment on something I didn't see. I suppose you want a comment on this debate. Here's what I saw last night. I saw Hillary Clinton give a polished, well-rehearsed defense of the status quo, which 7 out of 10 Americans don't like. I saw Donald Trump give a spirited voice to those of us who don't like the status quo. And I see emerging in front of us the potential for what a unified Republican government can get you, which can be a solution to our country's big pressing problems. I'm not going to get into the who said what this morning on some talk show because I didn't see it. But what I saw was a defense of the status quo, which Americans do not want, and I see an opportunity to get us on a better path.
You showed the right
Yeah.
temperament.
Follow up on that, you talked the first 20 minutes about rail against trade, TPP, NAFTA, and then, backed Democrats' position, no fly, no buy. Again, the Miss Universe comments. Do you feel that he last night didn't represent the Republicans?
Oh, I don't know if I would say that. Look, I've already made my comments on no fly, no buy and the constitutional due process importance for having Fifth Amendment rights. With respect to trade, what he has said consistently is he wants to have good trade deals. We want good trade deals, too. We want to make sure that the trade deals we get are those that are in the best interest for our country, and that's something we share. Juan. Yeah, Juan. Sorry.
Mr. Speaker, your advice to Donald Trump over the weekend was to over-prepare for last night's debate. Did you think that he successfully prepared?
I think this debate, I think people met their expectations, and I think Hillary gave a very polished, well-rehearsed, status quo defense, and I think Donald Trump gave a unique Donald Trump response to the status quo. I think he gave a spirited argument, and I think he passed a number of thresholds which showed that for, 90 minutes? For 90 minutes, he could go toe-to-toe with Hillary Clinton.
Last question?
New guy.
Would you comment on the level of support for TPP in the House and where things stand with outstanding issues?
Sure. We don't have the votes for TPP because I think the administration failed to get the right kind of an agreement in a couple critical areas, and therefore I don't think it's in our interest, with particular sense to our allies, to bring up an agreement that we don't have the votes for. They have to fix this agreement, and I don't see that happening soon. Thank you.